And then yesterday we talked about perspectives. Okay, so who has the strongest voice in the story? That's what we talked about yesterday. Make sure you're muted. Come on. Thank you. And then today we're going to talk about when there's two different perspectives and comparing those two perspectives, okay? Does that make sense? All right, so last night I was with the little girl I babysit for, and she was watching her most favorite movie. Okay, and her favorite movie is The Little Mermaid. All right, so we were watching The Little Mermaid, and when we got to the part where Ariel gives up her voice to Ursula, who is the sea witch, to become human and be with the prince, I couldn't stop squirming. I kept thinking about how silent she was. She literally gave up her voice, and that's it. We don't get to hear her thoughts or words after that. And this is a pretty big deal because Ariel is not able to tell us or anyone what she thinks and feels. So watching that movie made me think about you guys and the work that we did yesterday where we thought about the missing voices of characters, okay? So today I want to teach you that it's not just minor characters whose voices and perspectives can be missing in stories. Even the thoughts and feelings of major characters can be silenced. Sometimes it's helpful to compare characters, listening for whose voices you hear, whose you don't, and asking whose voices are strongest here. Okay. So I want you to help me or to watch me as I work this out in Stone Fox or show you how to compare the perspectives in Stone Fox. We know by now that Stone Fox is a main character. Remember who's Stone Fox? Who remembers who's Stone Fox in the story? Destiny?
The dog.
Not the dog, that's Searchlight. Who's Stone Fox in our story? He's tall. Remember, he's the Native American that wins every year in the race. Do you remember? All right. But you will listen carefully now and do the work I'm going to try, which is listening with a new lens as we reread, asking yourself, whose voices do we hear? Whose voices are the strongest? And maybe, is that fair? All right, so remember these three questions. Whose voices do we hear? Whose voices are strongest? And is that fair? All right, and I'm going to reread part of Stone Fox, okay? So make sure you're listening to me. The man was an Indian, dressed in furs and leather, with moccasins that came all the way up to his knees. His skin was dark, his hair was dark, and he wore a dark-colored headband. His eyes sparkled in the sunlight, but the rest of his face was as hard as stone. The sled came to a stop right next to Little Willie. The boy's mouth hung open as he tilted his head way back to look up at the man. Little Willie had never seen a giant before. Gosh, Little Willie gasped. The Indian looked at Little Willie. His face was solid granite, but his eyes were alive and cunning. Howdy, Little Willie blurted out, and he gave a nervous smile. But the Indian said nothing. His eyes shifted to Searchlight, who let out a soft moan but did not bark. The giant walked into the City Hall building. All right, so Little Willie and Stone Fox are two main characters of the story. And Little Willie, to me, seems that he is surprised and amazed. And I know this because he gasped. And in the story, it says that Little Willie tilts his head way back to look up, and that Little Willie had never seen a giant before. We find out a lot about Little Willie's thoughts and feelings. We also get to hear Little Willie speak. He says, howdy, And he says it like he's nervous. So we find out a lot about Willie. But do we find out anything about Stone Fox? Let me see. Did we find anything out about Stone Fox? Does anyone know? What did we learn about Stone Fox from that little part of what we just reread? Irsu?
That he's a giant.
Yeah, that he's pretty tall. What else do we learn from what Stone Fox does or does not do or say? Does Stone, Kyla, you got your hand raised? Okay. So Stone Fox, does he say anything to little Willie? Let me see, thumbs up, yes or no? Does he say anything to little Willie, Stone Fox? Let me see, does Stone Fox say anything to little Willie? I see Kevin and Paxton's thumb and Gabe's thumb. I see, those are the only 3 thumbs I see. I should see everyone's thumb. Does Stone Fox say anything to little Willie, yes or no? Let me see your thumbs. Yes, he does, or no, he doesn't. I see Heavenly's thumb, Caitlin's thumb, DeJay's thumb, Destiny. All right, so Stone Fox doesn't say anything to little Willie, even though little Willie talks to him. Okay, so that kind of tells us that Stone Fox doesn't have a lot to say and he doesn't really talk. All right, so when you are reading today, I want you guys to make sure you are looking at the 2 or just comparing different perspectives in your story. Okay, so you can either think about it like how I just did with Stone Fox and Little Willie, or you can think about it like The Little Mermaid with Ariel and Ursula. Okay, so does anyone have any questions on how to compare different perspectives? Awesome. Are you ready for me to show you your independent work? Vaughn says yes. Gabe says yes.